Here to introduce myself. My mom already introduced Anderson to all of you, so you already know about him. I guess what I'll introduce myself is why I think Brooke asked me to speak, which is my writing. I have a blog. It's called JillianBenfield.com. Been fortunate to get in some publications like Today's Show and Good Morning America, and I'd really love it if you guys followed me on social media, so we can keep conversations like the one we're about to have today going. And I'm just really thankful to be here, and I'm not going to give you any more than that because that's already part of the planned speech. So we'll just dive into it. You guys good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So my husband Andy and I got married at the ripe old age of 22 when we were especially wide-eyed. Is that part of anyone else's story here? Just me? Okay, a few of you? Okay, good, I'm not alone. So when we had been dating for the very long period of 6 months, I called my mom. I was still under the drinking age, by the way. I called my mom and told her that we were planning on getting engaged and married all within the next year. And she's here today. So if I haven't said this before, Mom, I'm sorry. But thankfully for Andy and I, life went just as we planned the first 4 years of our marriage. I got a TV news anchor and reporter job. He got into dental school. We had our first child, Violet, right before he graduated. And then the military moved us from Georgia to Las Vegas so that we could pay them back for footing his dental tuition bill, just like we planned. And so it never dawned on us that life could go off course. So much so that one day we're sitting around, he's like, babe, do you want to rank Germany or Italy first on our dream sheet? And I said, I really would prefer Italy, but I think we have a better chance at getting Germany. So let's rank that one first. This is only funny if you're military. And if you are military, you know where this story is heading, which is not in a good direction. But we thought that we knew the rules of life because life had worked out just as we planned. Well then, May 8th, 2014 rolled around, and my phone was practically glued to my sweaty hand because this was the day we had been waiting for over a year, because we were going to find out where we were heading for the next 4 years of our lives. And, if it was Europe, great, we'd have this once-in-a-lifetime adventure. And if it was stateside, great. I had just taken a year off from work, and I would go back to TV news. So either way, it was a win-win. And so I'm excited and nervous, and I'm pacing the house, and finally Andy calls, wipe off sweaty hands, swipe. And before even saying hi, I said, what did we get? And he said, Holloman Air Force Base. And now I am racking my brain because I had studied this list of every Air Force base across the entire globe pretty extensively, and this is not even remotely ringing a bell. She knows. And I said, Andy, where is that? And he said, Alamogordo, New Mexico. And we both got really quiet. And so what did I do? Anybody have a guess?
I Google it.
Called Mom. I think I called Mom 3 times that day. And I cried incoherent sobs. Because I don't know if you know this, but there's not even a Target in Alamogordo, New Mexico, let alone a TV news station. So the grand adventure was over, and now my career was definitely over. And I just felt lost, and I didn't know what to do or what life looked like anymore. And it was the first time something for us really went off plan. So later that day, I'm exhausted from all of the crying, but I feel this nudge, and the nudge is taking me to take a pregnancy test. And we had our daughter had just turned 1, so we were like not in the market for this. Like, this was not something we were trying for. But I happened to have one tucked away in a back drawer, and I took it, and I'm just like so exhausted at this point. My head is just hanging over my knees. And I finally look up, and there it says pregnant in bold letters. And I slap my forehead in shock, and I start doing that really like kind of scary laugh cry, you know, that you see in the movies. And I said, okay God, I see what you're doing. You want me to be a stay-at-home mom? Okay, I get it. Once again, I thought I had it all figured out. So 2 months later, we moved to Alamogordo, and unfortunately I called Mom again because unfortunately it is exactly how we imagined it to be. I will say, when we drive in, there's a gorgeous mountain range to the left, but on the right is just one long strip of nothing, and I mean nothing but fast food restaurants. Like, I still don't know why a town of 30,000 people need 2 Sonics on the same road, but apparently people of Alamogordo cannot get enough limeades. So 8 days later, it's time for my 20-week ultrasound, and so we go to the new doctor's office. And we go back to the ultrasound room, and the tech pulls up my shirt, and she squeezes that awful aquamarine goo all over me, and almost immediately tells us that we're having a boy. And Andy starts crying, and I start crying, because this is what we always wanted. We have a girl, a boy, just like we always planned. And then I noticed that the ultrasound's taking a long time, and she has me flipped to my side, and I start getting butterflies where she's digging into my abdomen with this ultrasound probe. And finally she gets the last measurement and thanks us, flips on the lights, and walks out. And that's when a nurse walked in and said, well, everything must look great because the doctor's not in here. And as soon as she said those words, he walked in. And he explained to us that there were several markers on the ultrasound that indicated that our child had a higher chance of having a trisomy. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, it means that your child has a higher chance of having a condition like Down syndrome. And my back turned on fire. And I just remember the words, I can't be a special needs mom, I can't be a special needs mom, I can't be a special needs mom, playing over and over again like a scratch CD in my head. Because of course I couldn't, because that was definitely not part of the plan. Well, a week and a half later, I'm cleaning up the kitchen from lunch, and Andy calls me again, and he says, I just talked to the doctor, and it's not good. I'm on my way home. And my heavy 21-week pregnant body just fell on the kitchen floor. And Mom happened to be there, and she came and sat beside me, and because she knew what happened. And I just started saying, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. This doesn't feel real, this doesn't feel real, this doesn't feel real. Poor Violet, poor Violet, poor Violet, poor Violet. And it was as if my mouth had to repeat what my head and my heart didn't want to be true. And then Andy walked in the door, and I know my husband, and I could see he had no color in his face, and I knew he was going to get sick. And so I followed him to our bathroom, and I'm trying to undo his constricting military uniform, and he started vomiting in the toilet. And when he was done, we both sat on the bathroom floor, and he put his head on my chest, and I could just feel his hot tears rolling down my shirt. We were 27, we had both just turned 27, and we were in shock, and we just couldn't believe that this happened to us. We knew that the test came back positive for something, but we didn't know what it came back positive for, and we had to go to the doctor's office to get the official results. And so we go in, and we're in the exam room, and he walks in, and he says, it's not good. Your child has a 99.9% chance of having Down syndrome. And it's normally at this point that people want to talk about their options. I said, okay, what are the options? He said, option 1 is you terminate the pregnancy, and we don't do that here, but don't worry, we can send you to a place that does, and you just need to make the decision quickly. Okay, what's option 2? Option 2 is you keep the pregnancy and you have it managed by a high-risk provider. Okay, can you tell us what Down syndrome means for his life? And he seemed kind of surprised by the question. And he said, well, at worst he'll never feed himself, and at best he'll mop the floors of a fast food restaurant one day. But don't worry, you don't have to be a hero. You know, you can have the baby here, we can keep the baby comfortable, but we don't have to do anything drastic to prolong his life. In other words, we could keep our consciences clean by having the baby, but we could let him die of natural causes. So the doctor didn't believe that our child had a life worth living, so I grieved like a death had taken place. I was really afraid of the dark as a kid, and there's like nothing unique about that, but as my mom here can tell you, this fear went way past the time that it was appropriate. Like so much so that one day I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, her dad, to come check out the house, to do like a walkthrough while it was still dark outside and my parents were at home. I was 17 years old when that happened. But now it was light that I feared, because at night pregnancy fatigue would kick in and I could fall asleep pretty easily. But then the morning would come and that sun would rise over the mountains and it would just shine too brightly on our reality, and I was hit with it all over again each day. And most days I just couldn't function. And the worst of those days, Mom had to pull the covers off of me, turn the shower on, pull a chair into the bathroom and brush my hair, because I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So, a few weeks passed, and there were 2 words that pulled me out, or at least started to pull me out of that thick fog of grief. Does anybody want to guess at what they were? You? They were school inclusion. It was school inclusion. I had never heard of school inclusion before. At my high school, there were 2 floors, and the first floor just had like the computer lab, the cafeteria, and then tucked way in the back next to the auditorium was the special needs class. The second floor is where the rest of us had our classes. And the only time that you saw students with disabilities at my school was if you happened to have a hall pass and to go to the bathroom or something, and you would see them walking single file behind their teacher in high school. There was us and there was them, separate. And it's why I believed the doctor when he drew this teeny tiny box around my son and what his life could be, because I didn't know there was another way. I didn't know that there was another way where his life would not be tucked away from the rest of the world. It's what spurred me to take a partners in policymaking course a year after Anderson was born. Partners in policymaking is kind of known as the gold standard among disability advocates. It's a 6-month-long course, and it's pretty intense. And the very first meeting that we had, there was an instructor named Jerry Adams, and he opened up with this analogy. He said, less than a century ago, astronomers believed that the Milky Way galaxy was the only galaxy in the universe. But as technology increased and telescopes became more advanced, they discovered the truth, that there are countless galaxies in the universe, and each galaxy contains billions of stars. And he followed it up with this. He said, people abort babies with Down syndrome because we as a society still view people with Down syndrome by what they can't do, not by what they can do. And that was a gut check, because that's exactly where my grief lied. It was all, even though we were a year past this and the grief was gone, the sadness was gone, so much of the sadness that I had was all wrapped in what I believed my son would not be able to do, not what he could do. And I realized that day that I still had a lot of work to do when it came to how I viewed disability, and I needed a better telescope. So who in here has used the phrase more alike than different? I have. I'm a blogger, so I've used that many of times. But it took me going through this course. It took me doing some work outside of that course to realize there's a bit of a problem with that phrase. Because doesn't it, I believe the phrase is true. I believe my son is more like his typically developing peers than he is different from them. However, in this hashtag culture that we live in, where we can't really dig into forward phrases with each social media post and passing, doesn't it make it seem like we're justifying the difference? Doesn't it make it seem like difference is maybe not the best thing? Leah Smith is a disability advocate. She has a disability herself, and she brings awareness to a form of discrimination I think most people are unaware that they have. I certainly was unaware that I was guilty of this, and it's called ableism. And she defines ableism as this. She says, it is a set of beliefs or practices that devalue and discriminate against those with disabilities, and it rests on the assumption that those with disabilities need to be fixed. My grief that I had over Anderson's diagnosis was in part because of shock. I think that's fair, right? Mm-hmm. It was in part because of how horrific the doctor's speech was. I think that's fair too. Mm-hmm. But it was in part because I thought disability was a problem. And because Down syndrome could not be fixed, because it is not something with a cure, I thought that my son's life was over before it began. And part of that is on me, but part of that is on my schooling and on a society that still abides by separate but equal. Where I find myself today in my journey alongside my son is in the middle of pushing him to be his best, while also embracing, not fixing, his unique differences. Because I don't want Anderson to fit in. Fitting in implies that in order to have a seat at the table, he has to change who he is. Now, I will say, Anderson actually has to sit at the table if he wants a seat. Right? Can you please just stay seated, please? But once he does, once he has proper support at school, or at a table in the community, once he does take a seat at the table, I hope he isn't forced to fit in, but instead I hope he is accepted for exactly who he is. I spoke with my friend, Dr. Gabby Fitchie, recently. Gabby has cerebral palsy and uses a wheelchair. And I asked her, I said, Gabby, what would you want people to know who may look at you and assume that given the option, that you would want to be cured of your condition so that you no longer needed to use a wheelchair? And her response made my jaw drop. She said, that's like asking a black person or a brown person if they would change their skin color to white if they had the chance. She said, I don't need to be fixed. Society needs to fix the way they look at me. And one of the most interesting things I found in our conversation that day was she told me that in minority groups and in marginalized groups, there's often deep roots and a sense of community. But it's lacking for those in the disability community because we still as a society view disability as something someone has instead of being a part of who someone is. So how do we change this? How do we as parents of children with Down syndrome help shift the paradigm around disability? I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to confront our own biases around disability. We have to do the hard internal and external work. We have to read the articles by those with disabilities. We have to sit in the lectures and take the courses and realize that disability is not something to overcome. It is something that makes our society richly diverse, and that is something to be embraced and supported, not fixed. I think the second thing that we have to do is we have to fight for school inclusion. I know all kids are different, and I'm not proposing that all of their IEPs should say 100% inclusion. However, if our kids are not spending a major part of their day with their typically developing peers, we are not only allowing them to be tucked away at school, we are tucking them away from life. Dr. Eric Carter is a special education professor and researcher at Vanderbilt University, and he says it like this. He says, segregation does not lead to a higher chance of a segregated life, it guarantees it. If we are allowing outdated ideas and systems to tuck our kids away with from their typically developing peers in the school years, we are also letting them tuck them away for the rest of their lives. The third thing I think that we have to do is we have to, our advocacy efforts cannot just be in our kids, they have to be outside of our own kids. They can't just be in their IEP meetings and in their school hallways. We have to not only step into the Down syndrome community, but we have to support the disability community at large. We have to volunteer for the local orgs. We have to take the board position for a national organization. We need to know our congressional leaders. I think all of us should be a part of the National Down Syndrome Congress's NDAC team, so we know when to reach out to those congressional leaders so that we can have a voice and make positive change for legislation that comes up for our kids now and that affects their future. We have to write articles for non-disability outlets so that people will see our perspectives, so that they will know that yes, our kids are living a disabled life, they are not living a less than life. And if you're not a writer, then you like, share, comment on those articles and contribute to the conversation. And I would especially appreciate it if you like, shared, and commented on my articles. If we all do this, if we all do one of these things I mentioned or something else that I didn't mention, if we all take one piece of advocacy and do our small part, think about where that needle can be. If we all just push it a little bit forward and where we could be 10 to 20 years from now, what this world could be like 10 to 20 years from now for our kids and for the world. We need to partner with our kids with disabilities, with those who are disabled. And when we do that, we are going to help repair cracks that are in the foundation of that community because of the world's outdated notions. I can't leave this discussion without addressing this, unfortunately. If we don't do this, if we all don't do a small part in advocacy and shifting the paradigm around disability, the Down syndrome population will disappear. And I know that's harsh and hard to hear, but I also believe that it's true. And I believe that it's true because we're already seeing it happen. When diagnosed prenatally in this country, the Down syndrome population is reduced by 30%. That number is much higher in other countries. We're already seeing, as you all know, Denmark, Iceland, that number is close to 100%. We cannot fight science, but what we can do is we can fight fear. And I think the best way that we fight fear is we fight for school inclusion. Because my fear rested when I got the diagnosis, it was because I didn't know anyone with disability. I did not know anyone with a disability. So if parents receive that diagnosis in the future, hopefully they will know somebody with a disability and they won't assume, like I did, that their child is doomed to a life that is separate from the rest of the world. The other thing that we have to do is we have to advocate for medical professionals to deliver Down syndrome diagnoses in a way that is unbiased and factually accurate. And the way that we do that is we support the Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network, who is leading this charge right now. And the other way we do that is we have conversations with our medical professionals about our experiences. And I think that if we don't do this, if we don't advocate for school inclusion, and if we don't have these hard conversations, and we don't do our part in shifting the paradigm around disability, we are in real danger of losing a treasured part of our society. And all of us in this room know that the world will be so much worse off. I know that the speech was really heavy, and this is like a little bit more of a casual setup, and I know that you guys are all really busy because I am too, and so I can't leave this without telling you why my mom is here right now. About 3 weeks ago, I had a moment where I just felt overwhelmed, like I could barely breathe, I could barely catch my breath, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that I have 3 kids, 6 and under, but the majority of why I felt that way that day was because of issues we're having with our child with Down syndrome. And going along with this moment I had 3 weeks ago, my writing muse also told me I had to tell you about a moment I had like 3 days ago. She's kind of like a bossy older sister. She like sits her hand on her hip like this and kind of looks at me like this. Get on it is what she tells me. This moment happened when I was dropping Anderson and Violet off at school, and I just started crying out of the middle of nowhere. And I started crying because I realized that our son is going to turn 5 at the end of this year. And for some reason, that number overwhelmed me. And in part probably had to do with the fact that he had a speech evaluation just a week before. And we found that he was still just below 3 years old for his expressive skills. This thing that we are doing, this raising kids with developmental disabilities, it's hard. And I tried to hide that for a long time. I tried to lie to myself about it. I think Anderson's first year of life, we averaged probably 3.5 office visits a week. And yet, if you were to have asked me what it was like parenting a child with Down syndrome, nothing but unicorns and rainbows would have fallen out of my mouth. I've recently discovered a word that has helped me accurately convey to myself and to others what it is like parenting a child with Down syndrome, and that word is "and." It is freaking hard, and it is freaking wonderful. I know I just used the word freaking in this very serious speech, but I felt like some emphasis was needed here, right? It is challenging and it is rewarding. It is tiring and it is a gift. And when we use the word "but," we discredit this fullness of the life that we're living alongside our children. With "and," there's no need to justify, there's no need to put a PR spin on it. It is both, it is all, it is "and." And I find rest in "and" because it's real. And we all need to be real with each other because we need each other. And when I have moments like I had in the car the other day, I try to remind myself of this, that my child's worth is not attached to his delays, nor is it attached to his accomplishments. None of our worth should be attached to those things. He is worthy because he's here, because he's human. He has a place here. He's loved and loves us. And that's what we need to not only tell each other and ourselves in those hard moments, but that's what we need to tell the world. And we do that through the many paths of advocacy, and we do it together because we are wired for a relationship. We need each other in every sense of the word, including in an advocacy. I never planned for my life to turn out like this. If life had gone according to my plan, I'd probably be bebopping around Europe, or I'd be working some awful hours at a TV news station right about now. Anderson has changed my life through and through. He has not only changed my career and what I want to do, but he has killed off the worst parts of me that needed to die. And he has instead taught me how to live. And he has given me new lenses through which I see the world. Lenses that have shown me more injustices than I was ever aware of, and also more beauty than I have ever known. And he's also introduced me to all of you. a community that is good, and a community that we get the opportunity to make this world a bit better, a bit brighter, a bit more inclusive, and a bit more accepting, and we get to do it together. And I'm thankful for that. And I thank God for a life that has gone off plan. What do you want to do next, Brooke?
Take our tissue. But I'd love just to open for some open conversation. What are some things that Jillian said today that really hit home with you, and what are some takeaways that you'll take